Good day, traders. Hope you guys are good and welcome to my learning space. As you've seen by the title of the video, today we're going to be talking about position sizing, using the right lot sizes and using them as a pro. So without any waste of time, let's get right into it. People often neglect these kinds of videos because I think most of the time we think that we know what we're doing, even though we don't. Because when I started trading, my main focus was on trading strategy. So my main focus was on being able to read the market. As long as my technical analysis was on point, as long as my win rate was on point, I didn't think that I needed anything else, right? Obviously, along the way, you learn about stop losses and all of that. But I thought that as long as I had that in pocket, I was fine. The problem then started when I felt like my trading has reached a plateau, in a sense that, yes, if I opened an account now, I would be able to grow that account. But at a certain point, I fuck up with my lot sizes. And maybe I open a trade with a lot of lot sizes, or maybe I risk too much on a trade and I would end up blowing that account. So it was a frustration for me for a long time, until the point where I decided to watch these boring videos on psychology and risk management. So for me, when it came to this topic of using position sizes, there's this other silly uh, Instagram post that I saw, and I used to refer to it. And it quoted this other rule. And I think a lot of people who are watching this video, let me know if this is you. Subscribe to this way of thinking. So basically, that rule says for every $100 that is in your account, use 0.01 lot size. And at that time, I thought it made sense. The one thing, though, that I didn't comprehend at that time was the fact that risk is not only a function of how much lot sizes you use on a trade, but it's also a function of the pips that you're going to use. Right? So I am, and I've always been a swing trader. As soon as I started trading, I started swing trading because the people who taught me how to trade, the people who I was following when I started to trade were all swing traders. And I felt like, okay, because I'm a patient guy, I don't like the rush and adrenaline and all of those stuff. I just started trading. So the problem was when I spotted opportunities for scalping, when I identified short-term trades, I would use the same lot sizes for different types of setups. So, for example, if I risked 100 pips, let's say my stop loss was 100 pips on Euro USD, I would use 0.10, sorry, right? Maybe I had $1,000, right? And then if this trade hit my stop loss, I knew I lost $100. Now, the problem was if I spotted an opportunity with a stop loss of 50 pips, I'd use the same lot size because of that rule, maybe. And then for that other setup, it means my loss is $50. So essentially, with this rule, the amount of money that I was risking per trade wasn't consistent. And so if I had two losses of $100, meaning with 100 pips, I lost two trades, I had to win 4 trades just to make up for that loss. You understand? So I realized that's not working. And then I followed this other trader. I don't want to name drop. This trader used specific pips, risked specific pips per trade. So for example, he'd say, I'm not risking more than 40 pips per trade. So whenever he places an order, his stop loss is 40 pips away from the entry point. Also, this was a mistake because sometimes you identify a setup, right? And that setup does not allow for that lot size. Some setups require a wider stop loss. Some setups require a tighter stop loss. So if you are stubborn and you stick with using the same amount of pips as your risk, you end up taking unnecessary loss. Even if you mix it with this other rule, it becomes a disaster. So these are the two mistakes that I see people doing when they risk with their accounts or when they take a trade, right? What I then realized at a later stage was that when you are taking a trade, you are working backwards. So you have your account balance, right? You have an account balance. From that account balance, you need to decide, okay, I'm willing to risk this percentage per trade. So say, for example, you had a $10,000 account. You are supposed to say, okay, I'm willing to risk 3% on every trade. 3% of 10,000 being. So I only learned this now. Okay, if I risk 3% per trade, how many trades do I have to take for me to blow this account entirely? Right? That's how you're supposed to be thinking. Okay, 300. I mean, 3 divided by 100 is equals to 33 point something. So you need to lose at least 33 trades in a row for you to blow your account. Now, from this figure, then you look at your setup. That's why I said that you work backwards. Okay, you're willing to risk this amount per trade. Okay, fine. How much pips is your setup? So let's say, for example, the market was going up, whatever your age is, and then you have a break of structure. Now you have an order block over here, want to retest, and then you're going to take a trade here, right? And then you're going to sell, right? So the next step is looking at your setup. Okay, we've identified your setup according to the rules of your strategy. The setup, the stop loss point that you're supposed to use is 60 pips. It means that after determining the amount of money that you're willing to risk per trade, then the next step is finding out how many pips you're going to risk, not the other way around. You start from the amount of money you're willing to risk per trade, and then you get to the amount of pips per setup. This is determined by the setup. The setup dictates the amount of pips that you should risk, not the other way around. Let me write that down, right? After that, you're going to determine the amount of value per pip, right? How are you going to get this figure? You're going to take your 300. If you do this manually, by the way, one way of calculating this is 300 divided by 6.5. All right. Once you got this value, now you go to choosing your actual lot size. Okay. We know that usually you find 3 types or 3 different types of lot sizes that you need to use. Right. You have this over here. Getting back to this figure, it means we would use this mini lot over here. So I was going to use 0.50 on that specific trade. So this is how you come about choosing the lot size that you should use. By the way, this is for EURUSD, right? So if I wanted to risk 300, I was going to use this lot size. It means if my stop loss was to hit take profit, if my trade was to hit stop loss at 60 pips, I'm losing 300. So that's how you need to work. That's how you need to operate. You work from your figure, from the amount that you've deposited. You choose how much am I willing to risk per trade. It's going to differ based on your trade preference, right? Some people, 3% is aggressive, so they'd rather risk less, 1% or less. Some people, this is too conservative, so they would rather risk 5 to 10%, right? But the idea is that there is no strategy that gives you 100% win rates. So you need to make up, or you need to also understand and also make provision for the times where you're going to be experiencing losing streaks. That's why the amount of money that you risk per trade is never supposed to exceed 10%, which is why I'll never advise someone to trade a small account, because this figure right here is impossible to reach, right? But that's a conversation for another day. So this is how you come to the conclusion of using the amount of pips per trade. You start by deciding, okay, this is the amount of money that I've deposited in my account. How much am I willing to risk per trade? Okay. And then you get to the setup, all right? So step number one, decide on your risk per trade. Step number two, determine the amount of pips that you're willing to lose. Let me write that down. Yeah, so you decided on the amount of risk that you're willing to take per trade. You used your setup to determine the amount of pips that you're supposed to be risking. And now, like, there's also another chat of, is that trade worth taking, right? Maybe you've done your research, maybe you have. And then there's the lot size, right? So yeah, this is the like manual way of finding out how much pips you should be using per trade. But like I said, this is like for EURUSD, this is standard. To find out the exact amount of lot size that you should be using, let's switch to like a pip calculator, right? All right. Now to demonstrate, we're going to be using this position size calculator from Baby Pips. But you can also use tools from MetaTrader, or you can click on to your broker's website. I'm quite sure that they have their own position size calculator, right? So let's say you have, okay, let me start small. Let's say you have 700 in your bank balance. I mean, in your trading account, $700. Now you're only willing to risk 5% of that. You take a trade, and that trade is 30 pips wide, and that trade is on USD JPY, right? Now assume that that price of USD JPY, the current price, is this one over here. So the lot size that you should be using is this one. You understand? It means that the amount that you're risking, if you hit stop loss, you have lost $35, right? Let's move on to another example. Yeah, so let's say you're going to take a risk higher, right? And risk 30%. This is the actual lot size that you should be using, 0.08. It means that if the market hits your stop loss, you are at a loss of 210 pips. So that's what I meant to say when I said you work backwards. You have your account balance, you have your amount of risk that you're willing to take per trade, and then you have your stop loss in terms of pips, right? It can vary from setup to setup. So say, for example, I have $1,000 or $10,000 in my account, right? And I'm keeping my risk to 3% of that, right? I'm willing to, not 3%, I normally risk 2%. It's the same, okay. There's one setup where I see a stop loss of 100 pips. Let's say it's on AUDUSD. One setup, I'm going to use 0.20, right? And let's say there's another setup that I see and with a stop loss of 60 pips. You understand? They're not going to be the same. They're not going to be the same. You don't have to use a singular lot size for a trade to be consistent. Similarly, you don't have to necessarily risk the same amount of pips, right? The most important thing, I would argue, is how much you are risking for gain. So I always say that you have to risk more than 1:3, right? So yeah, man, this is just an idea of how you should trade. If you found this useful, make sure that you drop a like. If you didn't subscribe yet, make sure that you smash the subscribe button, and also share this video with someone who you think might find value in it. For now, this is all I have for you guys. Till we meet again, peace.